If you've had a dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. We've got a special guest for tonight's show. Of course, I'm talking about Chris Edge, who's a dogman researcher from the state of New Jersey. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Vic. Thanks for having me on the show, buddy.
Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Chris, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I'm Chris Edge. I am the host of Crypto Normal X, which is a show that Vic Cundiff was a part of early this month in June. I am a butcher. I am also obviously, Vic said, a dogman researcher and investigator. I'm part of the NADP for the NJ Charter. And that's basically it.
I don't know if you've thought about this before or not, Chris, but the fact that you're a butcher, that might come in handy if you ever encounter a dogman out in the field. As long as you have a cleaver strapped to your hip, I think you'll be in pretty good shape, maybe.
The Rambo knife is where it's at.
Yeah, that wouldn't hurt either. Chris, when was the first time you heard the term dogman?
Well, I heard the term dogman back, and it was kind of surprising because it was back in 2009, and I was looking up information after watching several werewolf movies because my mind was so intrigued that maybe these creatures do exist, that there are real life werewolves out there. So I did some keying and researching for about a couple hours, and I looked across, didn't come up werewolf, but it said dogman and manwolf. And it was Linda Godfrey's blog, The Beast of Bray Road, The Lair. And I was just looking up encounters and stories from there and just taking a look. And that's basically where it all began, 2009, and doing some digging online. And then basically where it all began for me was thanks to Linda Godfrey's blog. I bought her books, and since then, in the past 7 years, from listening to your show, from encounters, from eyewitnesses, to looking up Jody Cook's research, as well as Linda's still, and then even just in general Facebook groups of people who come into the groups and tell their stories. And then for me, even, with that knowledge, doing my own show and having people come on and tell their encounters, also stories from people who I've ran into.
Knowing about them is one thing, but what made you decide to start researching them?
I wasn't fully satisfied with just hearing stories. I wanted to kind of get a little bit more out of it and just kind of do a little digging and researching of my own, because I felt that for me to be satisfied and cleared, talking and discussing and, getting stories, I needed to kind of do a little research myself and speak to some people, and then see if I can go out into the field and see if I can grab anything, see if I can find something that could show a little truth to all the skeptics, or even in general to those who don't really know much about this stuff, and share with them stories and then what I've uncovered and discovered in the fields of the dogman realm.
That makes sense. You found out about them in 2009, you said, but how long have you been researching them?
Literally for the past 7 years, since 2009. It was basically where it started, was just looking up that Google search. And then since then, from looking up everything and then going from there, really, that was from in the past 7 years. But because since social media had evolved, I didn't really have a signature outlet really to get more intel until the mid 2010s with your show, and then Jody Cook's website, and then the Facebook groups. Is really where everything skyrocketed in the past 2 years.
Have you researched any encounters there in your state?
Yes, there have been 5 encounters that I've collected so far, and possibly more. It's definitely bound to happen, whether some people who tune into the show in the state of New Jersey, or people in the groups who listen to my show or listen to this episode of your show, that'll come forward and tell me about their stories. There's always open opportunity for somebody to message me and say, look, I saw this and that. But for now, I've had 5 encounters come to me in my state. And then I've had 3 encounters that I spoke to with permission from the groups to tell their story as well.
Just think about all the people who do believe in dogmen who would never think that there are any dogmen in your state.
It's wild because in my state, we only have the Jersey Devil that's popular, and then, of course, the Amityville Horror House, and then everything else is all just a mix and match, very little Sasquatch reports. So you never would think that these creatures would actually hit the East Coast in such a huge way. But Pennsylvania is right next to me, and that's a huge hotspot for dogmen.
Oh, sure. Well, when you think about New Jersey also, how much of that state is unoccupied, it only makes sense that they'd be there too.
Just bound to happen, whether it was going to come out from somebody else or the people I've spoken to in general, or like I said, there's probably people who've had encounters that live closer to me because I do live close to the wilderness, but not, and basically residential, but no question the woods around me have probably had them running around in there and I just don't know about it.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised. How close do you live to the Pine Barrens?
Well, I'm about maybe a good hour and a half away because I'm in central New Jersey, and the Pine Barrens where I live in central Jersey is about a good, minus the traffic, about a good hour and a half away, 2 hours maximum. And with the Pine Barrens, basically with however much wilderness and locals there, it's just incredible that it doesn't surprise me if there's been more than just the average Joe of dogman reports or skinwalkers or cults that have been running around there, because it's bound to be that's almost close to 500 acres of just forest right there. It's wild. And I've never fully visited the Pine Barrens until obviously in August when we have an expedition come out with a couple of my friends and myself. We're just going to check out the place. But, for in general, just like you just said, does not surprise me one bit about if there's multiple reports, even if it was just, and there's been reports of satanic cults there. So, I mean, in the lore of the supernatural, maybe, but even in general with flesh and blood, the place is like our Land Between the Lakes, just minus the reports of murders and this and that, vice versa. But it's just wild. I mean, the Pine Barrens, I would not want to be a resident there. I would refuse to live there. Even if I had no choice, I would just consider living in a box. I would never want to live in the Pine Barrens, ever.
I can't say I'll blame you. It sure does seem like a pretty creepy place. Have you heard of any dogman encounters happening there in the Barrens?
Yes. I had collected a report, and the funny thing is, too, is that it was sort of like, I guess you can kind of put it on an accident, but it just sprue out, and I found this out, and it kind of links in with this story. I had one of my friends had an encounter, literally, and it was wild because it was just sort of, like I said, out of the blue, He had told me the story late one night, and it was basically just, I was just pulling up an image. I was just going online, and then he had seen a JPEG of the infamous LBL Beast sketch of Bartonelli. And he said to me, "What is that?" And I said, "Oh, well, this is one of those creatures that, I research." And he said to me, he was like, "What kind of creature is it?" That was literally his sentence. And I said to him, "You're going to think this is a little ridiculous, but this is what we call in what I do a dogman, a man-wolf." And he looked at me and said, "I got to tell you something. And I'm kind of nervous to tell you this because you're not going to think this happened to me." And my buddy, and I'm going to call him Alex, I'm going to give him that name. I spoke to him and he didn't want his information out except for him. I can tell the story, but just, I'm going to give him the alias of Alex. He had told me, and this happened in November of 2016. He sat there, and I can tell that when he was trying to explain this, because it took a while for him to tell me the story. He was nervous. He was shaking. And he had told me that he was camping out in the Pine Barrens in one of the camps. I forgot which one, but it was closer to the river of the Pine Barrens. And he was camping out with one of his buddies. And this was also in a period of time where there was the infamous clown sightings that were going on. So for him, he thought somebody was playing a prank on him. Because out of the blue, it was about dusk. It was roughly around 5:30, 6 o'clock-ish. And he had heard screams coming from east of him. And these were screams that were like bloody murder screams, like someone getting stabbed and shrieking. His buddy said to him, I was like, what was that? In the PG expression form, there was more to it, but he went out and he had said, I don't know what that was, but, I mean, if someone's playing a prank on me or if it's one of those clowns, I'm definitely going to do something. So they went out and looked and, he had a knife on him as protection wise. And his buddy was about maybe a couple feet away from him, just looking through the other side, just in case whatever it was going to come around and sneak up and, be tactical about it. And he went out and he had, he mimicked the scream a little bit. And then this was the part of the story where he was viciously shaken. I had to calm him down and explain it to him and tell him, look, it's okay. Nothing's going to happen. And he told me full blank that he got a little closer to the screams the next second, shined his light, and he saw a face. And the face, amber eye shine, he was able to look up and see the amber eye shine because he peered down for a second because he was trying to retrace his steps and saw this face. Face snarled at him and growled and discovered what that noise was. That's when he said to his buddy, we got to get out of here now, and just darted. And they're track runners. They were athletes. So they darted out of there faster than a speeding bullet. And they took their book bags they had, left their tent, left the food they had, and just left. They got out. They got into his Jeep and darted out of the Pine Barrens. And they were so shooken up that they had to pull over. When they finally got to a convenience store and closer residential, it took them about a couple seconds, literally just to sit there and relax their minds and question, what did they just see? And he broke down at this point telling me the story. And I looked at him and I was like, dude, you got to relax. It's okay. I mean, now that you're telling me this, I'm not going to sit there and point and laugh at you. And as since he's a buddy of mine, having that friend talk, trying to, make him feel better because he was whatever he saw definitely freaked him out so bad that in many ways he hasn't returned to that place since, and he's very cautious about going into the woods in general. He still goes out there and there, but what he saw that night definitely traumatized him. And, I feel bad for him in a way because, he's one of those people that, can stand by anything. He can run into people who are going to try to fight him or intimidated. But when he saw that, that was where his heart stopped. And, how he described it to me at the end of the conversation. And at this point, I had a full book of notes. That's basically the one encounter I collected in the Pine Barrens from him, which was pretty irrelevant since we were talking about camping and expeditions in various places just in general that night. So that's the one encounter I had from the Pine Barrens.
Did he ever go into more detail about what that face that he saw looked like?
The first thing I did was I also pulled up a chart of the 7 types, and I showed to him each type. What did it look like? And when he shined the light, he saw what would look like the portion of a pointy ear. So he definitely saw a canine variant. And then he saw the face, and I showed him the portrait of the variant 3. It said it had that attribute, that facial expression, that attribute, physical appearance of that canine variant 3. But he also said that it looked a lot more similar and very much so like the sketch from the LBL, the Bartonoli sketch, which is an infamous sketch. So that's when I kind of sat there and I said to him, I was like, are you sure? Because he was like, I'm very serious, and he was fidgeting a little bit because, I guarantee you the more I talked to him about this encounter, the more he was getting more and more terrified and, losing his mind a little bit because this definitely left him bothered for a while and still does. Since then, though, he's been comfortable about it. But in the description of what he told me, it had a whole lot looking like the LBL sketch.
No wonder it shook him up so much.
Oh, absolutely. I felt bad, like I said, and I gave him a big hug and said, look, man, I appreciate you came out and you let it out, but I was like, I hope you never see that ever again because if I ever saw like that sketch, that depiction of the creature in the LBL sketch, that's rough. That's probably one of the scariest sketches I've ever seen. I'm not exaggerating. That's just my honest opinion.
Yeah, it doesn't get much worse than that. All right, Chris, you've collected quite a few other encounters. Please share as many of those encounters with us as you can.
Well, the next couple of encounters I'm going to talk about came from Somerset County, New Jersey, which is up north by Newark and Trenton, but there's also a heavily wooded population there as well. This was a report I collected about a year ago, but this is where I started getting into my research a little bit more. And I looked up information from your website, and there was nothing about New Jersey, and there was information about very little in the Pennsylvania and New York region. So I did some digging, and I looked up a couple websites. I came across WordPress. I put in the search engine werewolf New Jersey, Dogman New Jersey, and I found the top on WordPress that said a werewolf sighting in New Jersey. This is coming from a guy, I'm going to give him the alias of Mike. He hasn't used his WordPress since July of 2015, but maybe if he's still around, maybe this episode can kind of help him, because I am retelling his story. But his story, and I'll even send you the link to the WordPress document, this goes back June 2010. He was driving with his girlfriend in this place in Somerset. I don't just remember the precise road exactly, or in the description of his blog he didn't say, but he was driving alongside this road in Somerset County, and all of a sudden, about maybe 100 feet from him, this giant creature, and it sounds to me like it kind of looked like the howling werewolf, because he described it as being extremely tall, pointy ears. His creature ran across the road, just dodging his car, and it just kept on running. And he stopped for a second, him and his girlfriend, because she was in the car as well, had said, "What was that?" Basically, they looked at it one more time before pressing on and just left. But it was a short encounter, but the creature, from how he describes it, was at least roughly 8 feet tall. Pointy ears, like I said, look like the howling werewolf. The way he's describing it sounds exactly like the howling werewolf or the canine variant 2, the hyena type. And now this is the interesting part. He said that this creature had black eyes. Now, whether that was a reflection of the vehicle headlights or he got a good look at it while it was strolling, he said it had black eyes. And it sounds to me, and I remember when I was talking to another former guest of yours about it, he was talking about the woo for a little bit, and black eyes looking dogmen. And, that's one of the other types that's been talked about besides the amber eye shine, the red eye shine, blue eye shine, etc., the black eyes. And to me, coming from me personally, that sounds a whole lot creepier than the amber eyes. That's terrifying. I would hate to look at my bedroom window and see that. But he described, and also that it had like scaly fur, like not as much fur, but it was there. But it was a very brief encounter, so he didn't really go on to detail. But he basically said at the end of his blog that, has anybody else had any encounters in Somerset County? If anybody else had this and that, blah, 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 blah. Because it sounds to me when he wrote that article, and I really wish I was able to come across it back in 2010. I don't know why I didn't think about that for a while, but at the time I was not that much of a researcher then. But I saw his blog literally a while back, and, I tried messaging him, like I said, never got a response. So I don't necessarily know if he saw this thing again or if he kind of took the information from the blog and just left it at that. But it sounds to me that whatever he saw, and it didn't sound at all like something you would rationally see, like a bear or regular bear, bear in general in that area. And Somerset's filled with some woodland, like not as much as Pine Barrens, but it's there. So that's one report that came out of Somerset. The next report, actually, it was part of a comment that came from a commenter who read that blog, who's also from Somerset. This is another very brief one. I'm not really going to go into it as much because there's nothing much to discuss about it, but The woman who talked about this encounter, it wasn't much of an encounter. It was much of just instinct. And I know a lot of researchers, I know a lot of eyewitnesses have this instinct of being watched, and everybody feels like they're being watched. I mean, I feel being watched sometimes when I'm walking on a trail in the woods, or if I'm going outside at night to just maybe, bored and just going for a walk in my cul-de-sac or my neighborhood. You always get that feeling, but she had a bad feeling, like it was instinct almost, like her mind was kind of like toying with her. And as people, sometimes I've noticed this a whole lot with dogmen talking telepathically to somebody. She was just sitting there in her dining room one night and felt like she was being watched, and something was sort of like kind of messing with her in a way. Like she just felt like her brain was telling her things not to do, or this and not to like even discuss, like don't go outside, or, don't go towards the window. And you could see the comment in the blog, but that was interesting to put out, because it sounds to me like that's one person from Somerset who's had an encounter or was something there that they know the stories of. And if there is a werewolf or dogman in Somerset County, then I would highly recommend people who come on and listen to this episode, if you are from the Somerset region and you are in New Jersey and have heard about it, feel free to send me a message or Vic a message, because it's, I'm trying to get more dirt out of this town. The final incident that comes from Somerset came from a woman who was also a commenter on this blog. I'm going to call her Maria. She had said that she had had an encounter with, she didn't have it physically, but she saw something walking casually down this road of a creature that looked very similar and sounds very similar to the creature that I discussed in the first incident. She sat there in her bedroom laying in bed, and she had her window open. Well, the blinds weren't shutting the window from outside, but the window was closed. But basically, she was able to see outside, what I meant. And she had saw this creature, just stray hair, sort of like the hyena type again, walking down the road casually. And she got up and took a look closer, and she was thinking to herself, am I seeing things? Like, is this like a dream? Which is what 90% of people probably think in these encounters. And she's just sitting there, and she sees this like thing, and she's kind of analyzing it, and it's walking casually bipedal at first. And then, this is interesting, it just stops for a second, begins to get down on its knees and hind legs, and just runs into the woods, just on all fours. That was interesting to me, and you can even see it in the blog. She was just completely freaked out. And it reminds me of an incident of a creature like that walking casually down the road. When I interviewed Jody Cook, the founder of NADP, he said to me in an interview when I was talking to him, he said that, there was an incident in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which is home to the Mothman encounters, paranormal men in black, for some people who didn't know. And he was telling me a story how there's this government facility that's not too far off from the area. We were talking about surveillance footage being, dismantled and being erased, quote unquote. And there was this small residential area where people saw this creature, this werewolf looking creature, not a guy in a costume, because he was too bulky and didn't resemble that of a guy in an outfit, didn't look too fabricated to him when he was being told the story, just walking casually down the road. And it's interesting because it seems to me like these creatures tend to, when there's no one around, or when, in this case, because it was a government facility nearby, their conspiracy theories can go up and down, that these creatures do have the instincts of walking casually like a normal human being, that they have that intelligence. And it was weird. But anyways, going back to the subject, she was basically creeped out. I haven't said anything to her because, again, some of these people, like the girl and the original guy who posted the post, Mike, they haven't been on their WordPress. So I don't know for sure what they really, if they're still seeing these things, or if Mike's encounter was just going casually just in the area and just trying to get to another county, such as Newark. And as for the girl, Maria, I don't know much about her except for what she wrote. But hopefully, if, like I said, they see this show or listen to the show, they say something or say, look, I read your story, and, if you want to talk a little bit about more, if you've had any more encounters, please tell me. But that's the Somerset saga for what I know now. The last story I've collected from New Jersey comes from one of my other buddies, and I'm going to call him Ricky. Ricky, straightforward, takes no crap from nobody type guy. He is also into the whole game tournaments, such as, Pokemon and, speedrun game tournaments, all goes to charity, this and that. And he was leaving a tournament in East Rutherford, and he was going to go visit his aunt who lives in Monmouth County. And Monmouth County, off the border of Howell and Jackson, New Jersey, is very populated with woods. You can travel a mile and a half and you'll see a house, a shack. That's a house. And then next couple miles down is another house. So it's heavily wooded. He was driving down, going, because like I said, his aunt lives in Monmouth, so he was going to pay a visit to her. And he was driving alongside. There's a couple ways you can get to Monmouth if you're coming from up north. You can take the Parkway and the Turnpike, and then you can go down a couple dirt roads, but you'll be on a dirt road for a little while, or if you're taking the back roads. But other than that, he, was coming off the back roads, and he was off this dirt road, and he had seen this creature just out of the blue, like it would cross the road, but it leaped. Now, many cases I've been also looking at lately just seem to be leaping. Like the creatures tend to leap, which is interesting. He thought it was a creature that was a bear that was limping, because it looked like it was limping when he was telling me the story. And he slowly just, drove right up to it, pulled out his mechanic flashlight, which is known for people who work on cars, a little small flashlight, peered out and saw amber eye shine, and saw this, to what he described it as, an ugly, and just growled at him like a roar type growl. And that's when he just put it in drive and just floored it out of there. And he wouldn't surprise me, the way he is, he probably, put enough dirt to have that creature cough, and he darted out of there. And when Ricky told me this story, I was finishing up an episode of my show, and, he was showing me some of his modifications he made to his car. And then, out of the blue, one of my guests notified me about the show, saying thanks again. And that's when he said, what do you research exactly? Because I spoke to him for a little bit, and he said, just, paranormal, Sasquatch, this and that. And these are things that, like I said, you can't really, when your friends, this and that, you don't ever want to make them think you're crazy for looking this stuff up. But Rick told me that what he saw wasn't no bear, but it was definitely that of a cryptid that looked exactly like a dog man. I pulled him back into my house and said, look, I'm going to take this pen and paper and I'm going to start taking some notes. And I always tell him, I was like, you better not be lying to me. And he said, no, I'm not. I'm telling you straight out what I saw. He told me his story, and then I pulled up a chart of the 7 types. And it's funny, again, another person pulling up the canine variant 3 looked a whole lot like the canine variant 3, the Van Helsing werewolf. And he said in his description too, it was kneeling down, but it looked like it was roughly, like it was pretty tall, pointy ears, amber eye shine, black hair, but it was at night, so it was most likely brown. But when he shined the light, the first thing he saw were the fangs, and that was enough to convince him that this wasn't your average bear. And it looked at him with those amber eyes, and it did that little like growl, and that's all it took for him to bolt out of there. In conclusion to his story too, I don't know his aunt, and I'm going to remind him, because I tend to forget sometimes with him, if he can try to tell his aunt if she's had any activity in the area, because this happened off the border of Jackson and Howell Township. So this is right in the heart of the heartland of the woods. And a funny thing I'm going to bring up too is that there's a bunch of, in those woodlands, satanic rituals that have gone down. Apparently there's rumors of the Ku Klux Klan being in that area. And I don't think it has anything to tie in. They probably know of it, but it doesn't surprise me if it's just Dogman. But they also have a bunch of Sasquatch encounters there too. The Jackson and Monmouth County, Howell especially, there's so many woods that are in that area. There's no question that there's something that's out there besides bear. It's mostly home to black bear. I used to live in Jackson for a couple years, but it was in residential. But even then, though, a creature that could be in the woods that are far behind my back of the house in the backyard, no question that there's something that could, kill a rabbit, kill a deer, and, a cat, and make you question, well, what made it did that? And, of course, I sat there, and when after Ricky told me this story, that was when I was fully convinced that, there's definitely more out there than just what people are telling me. There was that story, and then that was that, and then the 3 Somerset County stories. So those are basically what I've collected from the state of New Jersey. The next 3 stories I'm going to tell the first one that's brief. This one comes from a group member of the Dogman group that I'm a part of. He had explained to us that he had something 8 feet tall off the ground bang on his house several times, and it creeped him out because he felt like he was being watched regardless. And whatever it was, he was so creeped out by it that he was like, I don't know what to do. I didn't say nothing, but just in my mind, we'll have to wait and see how it plays out, because when it comes to how you see these creatures, whether they want to mess with you or you did something to get them ticked off, you got to hear the full story out in order to get a full understanding. And I've noticed that a whole lot now that I've become more advanced in research with these creatures, that it's best to listen. And if you have to take notes and, if it takes 2 hours, 3 hours to hear everything out, then that's what it takes. So, he was very brief, but, since then we haven't heard nothing yet. I'm still waiting for him to say something. But if for 8 feet tall off the ground and hear the banging, if he has photographs of dents, if he has photographs of footprints, he knows where to go. But then there is this now this is an interesting story. This is actually one I'm really interested to tell you and to everybody who listens. This story comes from a woman who messaged me for advice. And this is a woman I'm going to call Jane. She lives, and she did not give her whereabouts, except that where she lives, there's a creek. And she takes her dog, who is a bloodhound. And for people who don't know much about bloodhounds, they're guard dogs. They're very popular Southern dogs. They're not afraid of much. They're not even afraid of other animals. They'll growl at dogs, fight with other dogs if they want to. One day she was walking her dog down this creek, and it was this route that she had chosen. This dog was so terrified of whatever was around there that it was behind her, and it was weeping, crying, and it wanted to leave. So she did that, and on her way back, she discovered these teeth that were on the ground. And I was kind of curious at that part of the story, because I said to her, I was like, well, did you bother to even think of maybe it was just a different animal, or what you're taking you might not want to take? And she didn't know that at the time, but she was telling me that when she had found these teeth, she just had an unnerving feel of being watched. And when she was down in this creek, she left. And then a couple nights go by, and the activity began with just banging around the house, and just, something was in the area. And then she messaged me a few nights later saying that I saw a shadow pass by my window. There's something out here. I can hear something. I'm crying, Chris. I need you to help me right now. I don't know what to do. I'm really terrified, shaking in my bed in tears. And I tell her, I was like, Jane, listen to me right now. If anything, if it gets out of line, if you had something to do with the teeth, if you had something to do with making its disturbance in its territory, whether you touched a marked area, first and foremost, and it might have not been the smart thing to do, but I told her to pray. Told her just to look. Maybe if you pray, it'll go away, this and that. And I told her the first thing you do the next day is you go out there, return those teeth. I don't care if you have to apologize. I don't care if you have to just leave it and throw it, as long as they get the teeth. And at that point, I was convinced that she definitely touched something that was theirs, and it got them pissed. And it was to the point where, she eventually returned the teeth, but she had had a couple of visitations around that portion. She disappeared from the Facebook groups for a little bit due to a fallout with a fellow member. And this is the weird part. I had a dream last week. In my dream, she was in it, and there was a fathead. For people who don't know what a fathead is, it is the soldier type dog man. I like to call them the rogues because those are the types that will attack anything, even other dog men. I had a dream, and then she was captured by one, and this creature took her away from her house. And I was somehow in the dream and was in this area. And then I woke up and I was like, whoa. So I messaged one of my administrators of this dogman group I'm a part of. And I said, look, something's bothering me, man. I had this dream about this girl that I spoke to. And I told him, I was like, you remember that girl, Jane? Because he also helped out and pitched in. And, he messaged and reached out to her. And we found out she was okay because she had left the group a couple months after the incident. So she was perfectly fine. Nothing happened. She returned the teeth. She shared with my administrator a photograph of footprints, which I will show you and send you a link to, Vic, because these are pretty interesting. You should see the footprints on these things. Hair sample that she collected. And she described the creature as it being a gray, dark-haired, 8-foot tall, pointy-eared gremlin that almost just was walking her area. And since then, the activity's calmed down. And she's one of those people that, once it's done and over with, it's done and over with. She doesn't want to go back to it. So that's that story with her and this creature. But I found it interesting because, the way she was describing the story almost made it sound like that one case of where you take something from these creatures, they will come back at you and mess with you and force you to do something in an effective, appropriate way if you want to come out of this one unharmed. So in doing so, with that airy presence that her dog got and the teeth that she took, all played a factor in this encounter. The final encounter I want to share with you is the story. You had a guest on your show. I'm going to call him Joseph. I actually convinced him to come on your show. And he was telling me where he lives now, his friend in Florida was telling him that on this golf course he works at, and this is interesting because you not get many golf course incidents with these creatures because it's such thick land, but it's a lot of activity within the borders. And he was saying that he was on the golf course one day just picking up the balls, and he saw this large canine, just this giant German Shepherd head creature that just came out of the blue, walking, looking at him, and walking, just like that. And when he was telling me the message, and this was over Messenger on Facebook, and I said to him, I was like, well, I mean, has your friend quit his job, or did he just wet his trousers? Because, the way he described this friend made it sound like this guy was afraid of his own shadow, but in a good way. He knows it's there. When he saw the thing, you could smell the flesh. And I forgot to bring this out in the encounters, too. Jane didn't say anything about an odor, but she smelled a little bit what smelled like skunk. And then there was another one. My friend Ricky and my other friend Alexander smelled urine and smelled like feces odor, definitely defecation odor, something that doesn't smell appropriately right. And then the Somerset encounters didn't have any stench or odor that wasn't described in the comments. But back to the golf course incident, he had said that his friend smelled like what it smelled like, rotten flesh or urine. So that was partially convinced, and he said it was a canine, had a German Shepherd's head, this and that, and it was tall, roughly 8 feet, just like the regular report is. And he says that he hasn't seen it since this incident happened in the early spring, but he is partially convinced that it's still there, and it probably watches him. He feels that presence. And I kind of hope for him, along with my friends, to eventually come out a little bit more about it now that I'm telling the stories. Even Jane's encounter, because those are all the encounters I have, but that's what I've collected so far. And in each of these stories, it's incredible how they're just telling these stories, and there's a lot of incidents that play into it, whether retaliation on Jane's part, or just a warning sign like a growl, like my friends. And then there was, of course, the Somerset incident, which was not much, but almost as if it was just kind of just crossing away saying, hey, guys. And then the golf course incident, which was just basic. But that's all my encounters from the start to finish of what I've collected and what people told me.
One of the frustrating things about doing what we do, Chris, is the fact that there are so many people out there that still for some reason think it would be fun to have an encounter with the dog man. What they don't realize is what people like the woman you just mentioned go through in some cases.
Absolutely, Vic. And let me tell you something. When I first got into this stuff, I was one of those hardcore people who were like, oh, I want to have an encounter with one. I'm hyped, man. I would love to see one. Then I look at the stories, I listen to the stories, and I went from I want to see one to no. Because I'm a big guy, but even myself, I'm not convinced that I would want to see one because, if you ever seen a big guy, big man ever haul out of a wood territory in general, it's rare. And that's me. I would never want to see one, ever. And that's just coming from a guy who does research. I mean, if I have to see one, I would hope it'd be accidental. Or if in case, I'd be with friends or people that I can rely on who's had experience in the woods as myself and, are prepared. Because, seeing one solo is a no-go for me.
Well, I can understand that and appreciate that. Since you just mentioned that brings up a question I want to throw at you for some clarity here. I know about an outing that's scheduled for this August that you're supposed to participate in. If you don't want to have an encounter with one of these things, why go on an outing like that?
Well, like I said, I mean, if it was accidental, but at the same time, if it was with friends or if it was just with people, because I am going with a couple friends, one of them actually being Alex, who wants to go back. I convinced him in a way to say, hey, man, I want to go back to this place. I'll be around. I'll have a couple other people around, and, we'll all be respectful coworkers, this and that. And obviously, while they're there to enjoy the trip, I'm going to be there and obviously with Alex, just, waiting for something to happen. But I feel that the more you're with people, and this is the less case you'll have an encounter, you're not going to really get much out of it. But even if you're maybe a couple yards and just go for a little stroll, maybe you'll find something. Maybe you'll see something that scopes your area. But as long as you have, let's just say, for example, if this creature wants to take out me or take out my friend or take out any other person, a coworker, they're going to have to take out more than just me. They're going to have to take out 8 people that are coming on this outing. And I don't think they're smart enough not to have a body count that could get the public astir. You know what I mean? They're smarter than that. But like I said, I mean, when you're with a party of people, or if you're in general, you're with a couple people and if it's accidental, it's accidental. I still keep a lust if I want to see one, if I do see one. But at the same time, you got to be cautious. Since discovering these creatures, I'm more cautious of how I am in the woods now than, let's just say, when I was before 2009, when I started going into the research. But back then, you can't convince a teenager, or in this case for me, preteen, before 2009, around that era, that you're not going to sit there and believe in these things. But being cautious, if it does happen, it happens. But, I've learned from people who've had encounters and from people who are professional, well, obviously researchers who've had the experience to not do things that'll get it PO'd. And those are the guidelines, I think, in my personal opinion, Vic, that, as long as you know what's to be outcome of this and you're prepared and cautious, I think there's nothing really to be afraid of, with the exception of if this thing comes right at you, or if you're unarmed, or if you're not prepared for it. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. For the listeners who think there are no dogmen in England, Chris, please tell us about the interesting conversation you had with that woman from England.
This is interesting. Now, one of my favorite werewolf movies is American Werewolf in London. That's like a spiritual movie to me. It's like every Halloween, it's like a ritual. You gotta watch it. And in general, and every year, because that was one of my first horror movies I ever watched. But on subject, I am also an administrator of a UK group for dogmen. And I had befriended a couple of friends in the UK and one of the girls I spoke to was telling me how where they filmed American Werewolf, which was in Wales, in the Welsh moors, there have been reports of these creatures not looking similar to that of the movie, but that of just regular canine variants, just roaming the moors and roaming the woods. Whether they're partially convinced that the locals who are there see this and they will probably keep a quiet basis, much like the slaughtered lamb in the movie, that these things are out there. And for what this case may be, Europe being one of the original continent where the werewolf phenomenon began, it does not surprise me if, supernatural forces or the immortality or that of just regular variants who've migrated to there. And people often forget that these creatures can swim. They can swim underwater. They can swim, do this and that. I know that sounds a little far-fetched and a little asinine, but some of the reports that you've listened to, especially in Michigan, of these creatures that could swim and come fast at boats, it's possible. Or they're just regular creatures people have seen just in general down there. It wouldn't surprise me if a movie production like American Werewolf in London, was told some information about the area prior to keep an open eye out and be basest. Now, I don't know if John Landis or any Rick Baker in general out there would think about that, but it wouldn't surprise me. If anything, in any wooded area, any slasher movie, any horror movie that takes place in the woods, they're given some sort of information that's meant to be on the hush-hush about that area. But that basically, that's what that woman in the UK told me, that there's literally a real-life American werewolf, and it's in the area. And the Slaughtered Lamb is not legitimately called the Slaughtered Lamb. It's a pub, if people do the research. And it wouldn't surprise me if you leave that pub and you're traveling a couple miles to get back into town, that you happen to run into these creatures. It does not surprise nobody around that area. I wouldn't say, because I'm not from the UK, that the people around the locals are hush-hush about it, but they know of it. If they don't know of it, then they've obviously aren't ready to be prepared for what they're about to hear about these creatures. But yeah, that's basically it. She just said straight out that, she saw that she had heard about this because she's not too far from there, but she has heard the stories about, and since she's gotten into Dogman, told about the real life American Werewolf in London. There is a UK NADP member. And if he is by any chance convinced, and see if he can go out there and kind of do a little bit of research himself. And I have another woman who's on board to listen and hear up on the stories of the real life American Werewolf. I see if they can get in contact with her and maybe get in contact with the representative out there to see if they can kind of get together and get a little bit more intel on it, because it's a very interesting case if a real life rendition of that movie being real life. It's pretty interesting, Vic. And I didn't know about it until literally about a month ago.
As far as what you said about the moors, can you imagine being out on the moors on a foggy night and having a dogman encounter? It doesn't get much worse than that.
Here's how I see it. Here's the two combinations. One of the best howls ever recorded in Hollywood cinema from that movie, and seeing an 8-foot creature with that howl staring right at you is enough for me to say, I'm done. That's just how I see it, and that's just brutal. And that movie, when I first saw it, gave me nightmares, and seeing it again, solo by myself, it's still creepy. Because it's just, the idea that now it's even more creepier that this is a real reality. So every time they cut to the scene of the moors and they're being stalked by this creature, I just, get that anxious feeling now, like, that they're definitely being people in real life, and I would hope to God it never happens to nobody, that they're being watched. Something's out there, and it's not human. It could be a human in a shape-shifted form, but this thing isn't going to come up to you and say, hello, how are you doing? I'm just lost in the moors at night. Can you help me get back to town? it's not going to be one of those cases. It's going to be a much more brutal, scarier case, much like 85% of all the encounters that take place here in North America.
Yeah, I just can't imagine going out that way. That'd be horrible.
To tell you the truth, I'm not getting into death, but you know what? I mean, one of the things on my list of I would never want to be, mauled or disarrayed by a werewolf or a dog man in this case. Never, ever.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a good way to go out. Is there a certain encounter that stands out in your mind as being the most notable one that's been shared with you?
There's two. And one is definitely Jane's, and the other one was coming from my friend Alexander when he told me about the vocals he heard. Now, a little funny side fact is that I actually went onto the NADP website and I played him the 3 vocals that they have under the evidence folder. The one vocal that they have, the first vocal, which sounds almost like a dog shrieking and then a dog bark, that's the exact similar sound he heard in the Pine Barrens. For us, imagine hearing that at the just campfire at the middle of the night. I'd probably have to get a change of drawers following that incident. But those are the 2 that stand out to me because they were just completely on point, terrifying. And in Jane's case, I saw it more of a retaliation because they had where she was at was in territory she shouldn't have belonged in. And the fact that she stole teeth from them, which definitely was a huge negative. That's the kind of stuff right there that when you cross the lines, you get once that infamous saying, once you mess with the bull, you get the horns. In her case, she didn't get the horns, but she got the message right there and then and there, pounding on the house, seeing shadows and messing around, And when she had sent the footprints to my one administrator, my jaw dropped. These footprints are definitely not a Sasquatch. They're definitely not human. Those are canine prints. And that was a good story that she had told me. And I was glad to be part of helping her out with that, as well as Alexander's case, because he was so convinced that he had saw something out of a horror movie. But those are the 2 best to me at the moment, unless there's another story that I grab that can top that involves a whole lot of action. Those are the 2 best to me.
Well, I can understand why those 2 stand out in your mind so much. Has there ever been a time when you think a dogman was close to you?
Man, well, I'll tell you the truth. I wouldn't necessarily say that it was close to me, but it definitely gets an idea of who I am. But, at the same time, I'm one of those people that if it's possible to build a respect with these creatures, to try not to get on these creatures' bad sides. And, I'm not out to harm one. I'm not out to hurt one. I'm anti-kill. I mean, if a creature was coming at me and I had no choice, I would have to defend myself, whether it was using an air horn to disrupt their ears or firing a weapon. But I don't want to harm one. But just the idea to build a respect with one of these creatures and to know that I'm not out to cause any hysteria with them, just to see me as the one human being that they can say is my ridiculous little visitor, the human that lives in the house that does all these mysterious episodes and shows type person. But I have animals in my house, and they don't act weird. Then you can tell when an animal can pick up another scent of another animal. And a dogman's an animal. People tend to make it sound like it's an it or a thing. It's an animal. And if it could bleed, go to the bathroom like a regular animal could, it's an animal. But anyways, they don't feel weird. They don't get a sense of anything out there that makes them sound mysterious or just makes them panic. So if they are around me, they're not far from me. I do live in a residential area, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to come and visit. There's been reports of them in residential areas before. And this would not be one of those cases, be nothing new to the ordinary human being. But it does stand out. If they are near me, then they're not going to visit me just yet. And I know that sounds creepy, but that's just how I see it. They're not ready to see me just yet.
What do you think is the most impressive piece of readily accessible evidence pointing towards the existence of dogmen?
Well, this is going to sound cliche, but I think the best piece of evidence that comes is, and I know it's not technically, but it is, I'm wrong, it is technically considered evidence, is the eyewitnesses' reports, what they say. When I get people that come to the Facebook group who join in and are interested in these groups and the subject, even on my show, even who are interested in this type of stuff, the eyewitnesses and people who are fascinated with these creatures, such as myself, when I started out in 2009, that's the best piece when it comes to a dog man. Because the funny thing is, too, is that I've never been sent HD video footage or footage I can't submit to the public because of all the risks it takes, and people tend to forget that. But when people come forward, and they come as like not a cult, I wouldn't want to call it a cult, but as a movement that just comes at you and want to know this, or they've had an encounter that. And the idea that this is not just an average person coming at you, even my friends, they're telling you something that's changed their lives, or they're fascinated with, that they just love to just, want to let out. Marines who've had incidents with these creatures, PTSD is already in their brains from what they've encountered in war. But when they see one of these things, their mindsets just go out of control. But that's the best piece of evidence, is the eyewitnesses that come forward and the people who are interested in it. Because, to be honest with you, Vic, and we have the same opinion on it, Dogman is definitely the number 2, if anything, in the top 5 lists of cryptids, Sasquatch being number 1. It's there, and it's growing big with the encounters that are coming left and right. It's wild.
Yeah, it definitely does seem to be gaining steam, to say the least. What percentage of the 911 cases do you think dogmen are responsible for?
Well, when it comes to 911 cases, it's hard to say, because, there's so much action that happens in the modern day world that 911 incidents are just rapid in general. But when it comes to reports, when it comes to the dogmen, I think in many cases, and it's going to sound like a ridiculous number, and it's a little out of the basis in an odd number standpoint, but I at least think that maybe 45% of 911 reports, especially cases involving calls with dogmen or anything involved similar to that, are responsible, especially when they come out with the air quote unquote animal report of this attack, especially when it comes to bear maulings. Everybody blames the bear. When they describe what happens to this creature, but it's black boxed in a way. Boom, 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 bear. Bear, 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 bear. When really, is it really a bear? Or was it just, saying it's a bear because you don't want to tell the public, which I can understand, the public, why these things are out there. But, that's just an opening up a can of worms of hunters and fear-mongering that the public doesn't want to have or deal with, especially if they've never seen one. But they are out there. My friend, the two of them even said it. I asked this question. I was like, do you wish this thing existed? And their heads shook so fast in a negative no fashion that it was just, I was surprised. And I have to agree with that. I don't think anybody would want to see these creatures exist, but they do. And unfortunately, the people who see them are scarred, traumatized, and there's no question that those people have probably called the police dozens of times. There's a case in Jefferson, 1972, of a woman who called the police that this creature was banging on her door trying to get into the house, and went to the ranch and slashed a horse. The horse was alive, but, the sheriffs, that's another case of just, this creature can do things a human can do, get into cars, walk casually down the road, just in those 2 reports I talked about. They can do things humans can do, and it has that Planet of the Apes effect to it. But I think that's as close as we're going to get. But back to the 911 thing, it's big and popular there. It's wild. I think they are responsible 45% of the time.
I'm not sure what the percentage that they would be responsible for would be, but I think they're a lot more likely to cause incidents like that to happen than, say, a Sasquatch would.
There was an infamous 911 call of a Sasquatch. A guy called the police up in the 90s about a creature that was terrorizing his neighborhood, and the dog he had was killed. It was thrown about maybe 50 feet from his house. When you try to explain to a cop that you're seeing a creature that is huge and it's not a bear and it's trying to do things, on the other side of that line, the cop probably thinks of the dispatcher, another cop, the dispatcher thinks you're nuts. And that's where ridicule comes in. So they have to go out and investigate regardless, but they probably think to themselves that these people are seeing things. So to think the idea of their execution of people who call the police works, to say, ha ha ha, I get the last laugh, I'm far gone from here. But, you're having these people come out wasting their time. But we know that you saw us and we're here to stay. And that's where it goes from there.
Yeah, that's an awfully tough situation to be in. You have to really feel for these people. Well, it's about that time, Chris. Before you give us your closing comments, though, please tell us more about your show and how the listeners can hear it.
Well, Crypto Normal X is a show that basically, thanks to the man himself, Vic Cundiff, was inspired to do. Also because I felt that now that a lot of people are somewhat knowing what I do on the side of what I do is this and what I bring to the table, I feel that having a show that talks about cryptozoology and paranormal, much like the last guy, is an importance. And to have a younger generation such as myself come in and pitch in and say that, you can have all the veterans who've done this for a while, but I have someone who's interested, even if it's just me and a small portion interested in this stuff that want to listen in. And what I bring to the show, and my show, of course, for some people before we go further, it's not a show, I have a no filter tolerance on my show because I feel that if people are going to tell their encounters, I want them to let it all out. And I also, the show is still relatively new. It's been out since March. It's not that one show where we talk for an hour and we put a recording of an hour. I can go on for 2 or 3 hours and edit it out, but make it out to be 2 to 3 hours long and have people just talk. And whether people see these shows for entertainment or they see these shows for intelligence, much like I see your show as intelligence to learn about these creatures, it's important to note that it's an important factor in keeping the show alive and having a younger generation tell stories of cryptozoology and paranormal, especially try to tie them in together because they do link in a certain way. Much like human and ape, there is a missing link. But basically, Crypto Normal X, I don't do the show for, fun. I do the show for research, listening, and to have fun. That's what I meant to say. But I also want to let people know that, it's not just dedicated to one subject. We're telling more than one subject, but we want people to be interested and listen, that you're not just listening to a guy who's out there to ridicule people. You listen to somebody who wants to learn more, but wants to help people out as well, which is a reason why when I do my show, I don't try to be the same individual or copy another host to have the same old phenomenon go on and on and on and on, and then, similar format, but try to change it up a bit. And I think that's what makes the sparkling of Crypto Normal X happen. So for all those listeners out there who listen to my encounters that I collected and want to check out Crypto Normal X, it's simple. Crypto Normal X, CryptoNormalNX is what you need to research on YouTube. It's on YouTube. There's also a Facebook group called Crypto Normal X Official YouTube and Discussion Group, which is my group. That is if you want to join in, feel free. Guys, share your stories, share everything you want to talk about, what you want to learn. And of course, Crypto Normal X airs every Saturday night. So that's basically it with Crypto Normal X. It's a very good show. We do a lot of stuff on the show. Simon Young, who everybody knows from the Bigfoot Eyewitness show, the sister show of Dogman Encounters, and then David Kyleman of Dogman Encounters episode 5, are two co-hosts I have from time and time on. We interviewed Vic. Our biggest interview was Vic and Jody Cook's interview. So guys, you're looking for, if you, like I said, entertainment or information-wise, feel free to tap on forward. That's basically it for Crypto Normal X, what I wanted to talk about with that.
If you haven't checked out Chris's show yet, you really should check it out. I'm going to post a link for it in the description of tonight's show so you know. Well, Chris, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, if there's one thing, and if Vic hasn't said it, or you don't recall, I'll say it. for people out there who have had an encounter, don't be afraid to sit there and, don't be afraid to say it. You don't even have to say it on a show. You can message Vic, message Jody, message me, anybody, whether it's Dogman, Sasquatch, you're telling your story. If you do not have a family that doesn't believe you or friends that don't believe you, you have people who are total strangers to you, but they believe your story and they want to be there to help you. And don't be afraid also to test your endeavors and try to contact with other people and ask questions about this stuff. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Questions are questions. And always just follow what you do. Don't be afraid to do anything. You believe in yourself, and that's enough belief in your system to believe that you can do anything. And I mean that too. So that's basically in my closing arguments. Just, don't be afraid to do something. Whether you have an encounter, whether you have an interest and you want to learn more about it, don't be afraid. Just say something. That's basically what I got to say on that.
Well said. And Chris, thank you for doing what you do.
Likewise, brother. Thank you for doing what you do as well and being a huge icon and helping out people as well, my friend.
Well, thanks for the good words, but Icon and Vic Cundiff, I just don't see those two going together, but thanks for the compliment nonetheless.
Absolutely, buddy.
Well, you have yourself a great night, okay?
Thank you, Vic. You as well. Good night, everybody, and including yourself, Vic. You guys have a fantastic evening.
Thanks again so much for coming on, and have a good night.
Thanks, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.